Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for my weekend reading report. It's time for my weekend reading report, where Roger and I talk about all the exciting things that I read during the previous week. And it's not been a bad week. It's been busy as usual, but it's not been bad. Of course, I have been reading the great book of Amber, which is actually 10 books. 10 books in this one book. These are the Amber Chronicles. I was talked into reading these books by the great Grammaticus over on his channel. He did an excellent review of the first 5 books in the Amber Chronicles. I'll try to link that down below because it's pretty good. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to make January Ambuary, and I'm going to read all the Amber books, but I didn't because I ran out of January. We've only got a few days left of January, so not enough time to finish. I did read the first 5 books, which is the Corwin cycle. There are 2 cycles in the Amber Chronicles. There's the Corwin cycle and the Merlin cycle. And I finished the Corwin cycle. Really, really interesting fantasy novels. All 5 books really make up one story. And so it was good reading them one after the other because they do just follow one after the other and they do tell one story. And what a wild story it is. Corwin, who wakes up in a hospital, doesn't remember who he is. And in the process of escaping from this hospital and finding out who he is, it turns out, he's a superpowered immortal being who is a member of a family, who are a royal family in the great city of Amber, which is in another dimension, and he just happens to have the power, and all his family members do as well, to travel throughout these different dimensions. But his city, Amber, and his world, that is the real world. And every other dimension, including Earth, is just a shadow of that real world. And some of the scenes where he travels through the different dimensions are really kind of a trip. Really interesting stuff. I am told that Roger Zelazny, who wrote this fantastic series, didn't take drugs, but you would never know it from some of the descriptions in these books. It's really, really interesting. A lot of imagination, really creative, and a lot of fun. These books are a lot of fun. All of the family members are always squabbling and fighting with each other and do terrible things to each other and occasionally try to kill each other in order to gain power. It's great stuff. And along the way, there are a lot of questions going into this series, the first series of books, the Corwin cycle. And, there are mysteries, and when you think you found out the answer, you haven't, because in the next book, it turns out it was something different. A lot of twists and turns in this series. Excellent pacing in the series. And Corwin is a really fun character. I mean, he's not a super good guy. None of the family members are at all. But really interesting. And I had a great time with the Corwin cycle in the great book of Amber. So I finished that up. And then I've heard that the second cycle of books, the Merlin cycle, are not as good as the books that were in the Corwin cycle. But I read the first book, Trumps of Doom, which is the first book in the Merlin cycle, and that was really good. So, at least so far, I don't see any drop-off in quality at all. It's a little bit different, but still really good. And now we've moved from the crazy 70s into the 1980s when he's writing these books. And he wrote Trumps of Doom, I think, in the early 80s, if I'm remembering right. I can't remember the year. But either early or mid-80s, actually. And you can tell it's really fun. So I'm having a great time reading these books, but now January is almost over, and So what I'm going to be doing going forward is I'm going to be reading maybe 1 or 2 Amber books a month until I finish them up. And I tell you, Trumps of Doom ends, you really want to know what happens next. So yeah, I look forward to the next book in the Amber Chronicles, which is going to be the Blood of Amber, or Blood of Amber. So having a great time with this. I highly recommend this series if you're interested in fantasy at all. These are really different, and they're a lot of fun. So yeah, Amber Chronicles, well worth a read, I think. So there was that. And like I said, January is almost over, but I did have some time yesterday. So I picked, oh, and before I talk about that, I have to mention that for the 500 book challenge, the challenge where I'm reading 500 books before I will buy any new ones, 500 books I own before I'll buy any new ones. Trumps of Doom was book number 100. It was book number 100. So I finally finished 100 books. That took 9 million years, it feels like. And because I've been tracking them on Goodreads, it's been troublesome because, as I've mentioned before, Goodreads, every time I check Goodreads, it tells me a different number of books I've read for the 500 book challenge. Literally every time I look. Because Goodreads sucks for some reason at keeping track of your books, which is like the thing it's supposed to do. So I actually had to take this pad of paper and write out all of the books I read just so I would know the number. And yeah, it turns out Trumps of Doom was actually the 100th book. And so yesterday I read my 101st book, which is this one, Edgar Rice Burroughs' The Writer. This was a really quick read. It's a really short book. So since I had time yesterday, I just sat down and read it, which is nice. When I actually have time to read, I can actually get through some pages. And this was not long. And so The Writer, Edgar Rice Burroughs' The Writer. I am reading every book written by Edgar Rice Burroughs more or less in the order that he wrote them. And this is the next one. And this is a really fun book. I didn't actually have terribly high hopes for this. It's not one of his main series books. I really want to get back to Tarzan. The next book I have to read is Jungle Tales of Tarzan. But this was a lot better than I expected. It is another book in the mold of A Prisoner of Zenda, that kind of thing, where you have 2 different mythical countries somewhere in Europe. Who knows where exactly, but these 2 countries are somewhere in Europe. And we have mistaken identities and people taking each other's identities, and we have incredible coincidences, and we have an American going to these countries and getting into trouble. It's really fun. It's, the plot is actually not bad. It's actually not bad. It just requires a great deal of coincidence and very unlikely situations, but that's kind of, you expect that stuff with Edgar Rice Burroughs. And he's a good enough storyteller that he pulls this off, and it actually was a really entertaining read. So yeah, I had fun with The Writer, a lot better than I expected. So I read this, book number 101 for the 500 book challenge. That was cool. I still have a few days left of January. I don't exactly know what I'm going to read next. I'm going to, for today, for the rest of Sunday, I'm going to finish this. This is The Mighty Thor, War of the Gods. I've been reading every issue of Thor from the first run of Thor. The first run of Thor ran from the early 1960s into the mid-1990s. And this is the 8th epic collection, which collects Thor stories from 1975 through 1977. And they are excellent. This is really, really good. So Jerry Conway was writing Thor, and I liked Jerry Conway's stories for their imagination and because of some of the weird places he took the characters. But Len Wein has taken over now, and he's a much better writer, in my opinion. And so we get some fantastic issues of Thor, and the artwork is great. John Buscema does most of the artwork in this, and it's wonderful. I'm going to be talking about this particular epic collection very soon on Epic Comic Book Wednesdays. But I have one more story in this book to read, and that is from King Size Annual number 5, which has War of the Gods, the title story from this collection, which has the story where Olympus and Asgard go to war. And of course, that gives Hercules and Thor a chance to beat on each other again. So I'm going to read that this afternoon, and I'm looking forward to it. And that'll polish off this epic collection, which has been great fun. And yeah, so I'll just move right on to the next epic collection. After that, as far as the other book I'm going to read, I don't know yet. I'll decide this afternoon what the next book is going to be, and I will let you know next week. I've also been doing something else. I've been missing Superman, so I am reading Superman every Sunday now. Superman stories every Sunday. So Superman Sundays are going to be a thing, and I am in the middle of, which issue of Superman is this? I'm in the middle of Superman issue number 14 in the Golden Age Superman Omnibus Volume 2. Here is some helpful hints from Superman for being super healthy. You know, you want to be super healthy, and Superman's always here to help you out. And of course, this great classic cover from Superman issue number 14. I'm in the middle of this. I had to stop reading it because I had to make this video. So I'm making this video, and then I'm going to read more of this. So that's the stuff I read this week. I did get some cool stuff in the mail. I made a video yesterday because Edgar Rice Bros. Incorporated sent me a bunch of cool stuff, which was really nice. It was cool that they noticed me. You know, I'm always talking about Edgar Rice Burroughs. He's one of my favorite writers of all time. So that was cool, and they sent me some stuff. And so watch that video from yesterday for all that stuff. But I did get a few other things. I've got some comic book related stuff that I had pre-ordered that have arrived. And this next thing, I mean, if you were a comic book fan in the 1990s, you remember the Spider clone. Yes, the Spider-Man Epic Collections have finally gotten to the clone saga, the saga of the Spider clone. Who is the real Spider-Man, actually? Oh, no, he's not. Boy, this story took some ridiculous twists and turns. This was an interesting time to be reading this comic book, Spider-Man. It's interesting, the Clone Saga. I don't think I've read any of these issues since 1995 or whatever else. Yeah, this one is from 1994 for the beginning of the Clone Saga. It felt like it went on forever. When these comics were coming out, it felt like the Clone Saga would just never end. And so, yeah, we finally got this epic collection. This is the Amazing Spider-Man Epic Collection, Volume 27 from 1994. But it has all of the stories that were involved with the Clone Saga. It also has Web of Spider-Man issues and Spectacular Spider-Man issues. So it has all that stuff. So you can follow the whole thing. So this was interesting. I got this. And I also got the second Marvel 2-in-1 Epic Collection, came in the mail. With The Thing. They still haven't done Marvel Team Up, but we've got 2 Marvel 2-in-1s with The Thing and whoever else he was teaming up with. But the really exciting thing, and this is a book that I've been waiting decades for. Decades. I've been waiting so long for this, and it finally arrived. It's Rom! It's Rom Space Knight. Do you remember Rom? If you were reading comic books, Marvel Comics in the 1970s, you remember Rom. But if you weren't reading Marvel Comics in the 1970s, maybe you have no idea who this is. Because Rom is a character that was based on a really stupid toy that nobody I know ever had or had even seen. But it wasn't Marvel's character. They licensed this character. But the comic book, based off of this toy, was really popular. And it lasted, 75, 80 issues or something? I don't remember. But it went on for a while. And Rom became this big part of the Marvel Universe. I mean, all kinds of Marvel characters showed up in his comic. He was in other comic books. But when Marvel lost the license, they lost the rights to print any of those comics. So Rom hasn't been reprinted ever. He's never been reprinted. So if you weren't around to read these comics in the late 70s and early 80s, it's understandable if you don't even know who this guy is. And that left Marvel in kind of a fix because they're reprinting all of this stuff now from the 70s and the 80s. But if ROM wasn't an issue, they can't print it, or at least until now they haven't been able to. So you'll have some epic collections or omnibus volumes that are just missing certain issues because ROM was in there and they can't print ROM. Well, they got the license back, so finally they're able to print ROM, which is great. Frank Miller did that cover. That was the cover to the first issue, which I remember. I got this at the 7-Eleven convenience store off the spinner rack. And I remember seeing that cover and opening it up to this fantastic Sal Buscema splash page, you know. And I was like, oh, I got to get this. I'm getting this. And I was hooked on ROM. ROM became a must-buy comic book for me about this space knight who was after the dire wraiths, the evil aliens who invaded his planet. And, you know, a bunch of people had to become space knights and become encased in these robotic cyborg suits of armor. And Rom is traveled to Earth to get the dire wraiths before they could take over the planet Earth. And it actually has, I mean, this is so cool. I really loved this comic book. And finally it is reprinted. I mean, it just has some of Sal Buscema. It has some of Sal Buscema's best work in this comic book. I mean, he does such a great job in these issues. And so I'm overjoyed. I'm overjoyed that this exists. My partner over at Epic Comic Book Wednesdays, Steve Donahue, is not so overjoyed. He hates ROM. So that'll be an interesting Epic Comic Book Wednesday episode, which will be arriving fairly soon, in the next few weeks at least. But I'm going to reread all of these issues because love ROM. So glad this exists. Now, if Marvel does what they did with Conan, they will only keep the rights long enough to finish printing ROM in omnibuses. And that'll be 3 omnibuses. And then they probably will not bother to renew the rights. But we'll see. We'll see. I mean, there are a lot of Marvel comics that ROM appeared in that now that they have the license, they can reprint. So we'll see what they do. It'll be interesting to see how long they keep the rights to ROM. We'll see. Are they going to come out with a new ROM series? I don't know. I haven't heard anything. The only thing I've heard about ROM is the omnibus volumes, and that's it. But we'll see. We'll see what they do. That was cool to get. And that's pretty much it. I will catch you next time.